Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps us grow. In today's video, we're going to be discussing on how Peter Miles visited the world from Purgatory. So let's get started. Perhaps the most spectacular of dead people who were permitted by God to pay a visit to world was that of Peter Miles. His visit confirmed the belief that the souls in Purgatory, although in terrible suffering, are happy that heaven is assured and thus take their sufferings the same way a sick person accepts any painful treatment being administered to him in order to cure him of his ailment. If a sick person requires an injection to be cured, he desires it, and even begs for it, even though he knows it will cause him some pain. This is because he knows that it is necessary for him to go through it in order to get cured. In the same way, the souls in Purgatory are grateful at being given the opportunity to be purged of their sins in order to enter eternal glory. In the year 1070, when Boleslas II was the Duke of Poland, there was a bishop by name Stanislaus, now a saint, who then was the Bishop of Krakow, Poland. He never failed to remind the Duke of his just duties whenever the latter was seen to engage in acts likely to scandalize his subjects. The Duke was not happy with this and sought ways to take revenge on the prelate who was merely exercising his holy duties towards all to ensure their salvation. Peter Miles owned a piece of land near the Church of Krakow. He sold this piece of land to the bishop in the presence of some witnesses, and the land became part of the church compound thereafter. Peter Miles later died, and 3 years after his death, Duke Boleslas II came up with his planned revenge on the bishop. He incited the children of Peter Miles to claim that the bishop used their father's land without paying for it. He went further to bribe all the witnesses, and used his position as the Duke of Poland to intimidate them. When the case was brought up for hearing, the witnesses, to the surprise of the bishop, denied ever being present when the land was sold to the church. The bishop was therefore disgraced, and denounced as a usurper of the property of another, and ordered by the court to make restitution. With a sorrowful heart, the bishop raised his heart to God and prayed silently, and he received a sudden divine inspiration, which made him speak thus: "Since I have been painted a liar and usurper, and no longer have any witness to testify to the truth of my claim, may I humbly ask for a delay of 3 days to enable me bring in person the man who sold the piece of land to me to testify." The court granted his request, with scorn. Those among the crowd in the court who knew that Peter Miles had died some 3 years ago thought that the bishop was going to make a desperate effort to bring one other witness who would not denounce him like the other witnesses. Saint Stanislaus then fasted, watched and prayed to God to take up the defense of his cause, since he had no other person alive to defend him. He continued praying and fasting, and on the 3rd day, after having celebrated Holy Mass in his church, he went out to the place where Peter Miles was buried 3 years before. He was accompanied by all the reverend fathers, reverend sisters, and many of the faithful in his diocese. On arrival at the burial ground, the crowd moved towards Peter Miles' grave. The bishop ordered that the grave be opened. The workmen started work and opened up the grave. It contained nothing but bones of the dead man. He touched these bones with his crosier, and in the name of Jesus, who is the resurrection and the life, he commanded the dead man to arise, following the instructions and directives of the divine urge inside him. Suddenly, and in the presence of the whole people who had gathered there, the bones moved and reunited, each staying in its normal position when alive. Next, they saw human flesh forming over the bones, and being covered with clothing as it formed. Moments later, and before the stupefied crowd, some of whom fled with fear, there arose from the grave Mr. Peter Miles. He stretched forth his hand and held that of the bishop, who led him to the tribunal. As both men approached the court, followed by the crowd which was now singing praise to God, there was a stampede among the huge crowd that had gathered. This case had received a great amount of publicity since it began, and many people came to the court that day. The Duke and the judges who did not know Peter Miles in person stood their ground along with many others in the court, while those who knew him fled in fear. Those among the crowd who knew that Peter Miles had died could not believe their eyes as they beheld another Peter Miles approaching the court. Upon entering the court, the bishop turned to the Duke and said, "Behold Peter, he comes, Prince, to give testimony before you. Interrogate him, he will answer you." It is impossible to depict the stupefaction of the parish councilors and other citizens of Krakow who were able to recognize the Peter Miles they had buried 3 years before. The Duke and the judge were told that the man they were looking at died 3 years ago. Without anyone having any more courage left to open his mouth to question him, Peter spoke up. He affirmed that he sold the land to the bishop and that he was paid by him for it. Then turning to his children who stood trembling with fear, the dead man reproached them for having accused the pious prelate against all rights of justice. Then he warned them to do penance for so grievous a sin. Wishing to complete this great miracle for greater glory of God, the bishop proposed to the deceased that if he desired to live a few more years on earth, now that he was back to life, he would be able to obtain such a favor for him from God. At this, Peter replied that he had no such desire. He said that he was in purgatory, but that he would prefer to return there immediately to continue his suffering rather than take the risk of living in this world again, because he was not sure he would be lucky to escape eternal damnation if he lived again as a human being. He begged the bishop to only beg God to shorten the time of his suffering in purgatory so that he might be delivered. After that, the bishop again led him back to the grave in the company of a big crowd of people. When they arrived at his grave, Peter waved at the crowd, shook the bishop's hand, and laid himself down in his grave. Suddenly, before all eyes, his body fell to pieces, and his bones resumed the same state in which they had first been found, and the grave covered again. Soon afterwards, several people including the bishop engaged themselves in prayers and offering of holy masses for the repose of the soul of Mr. Miles. Although he did not make any apparition to announce his deliverance from purgatory, yet there was reason to believe that Peter Miles was soon delivered from those purgatorial flames by the prayers of the bishop and several other people.